Dear all, welcome to our opening of the academic year 2021-2022. And it's a great pleasure to have so many of you physically present in this Film Museum I in Amsterdam. And I know that there are also many people watching the live stream today. So welcome to you at home as well. Today, we have a very special event. So each year we have this opening event, but this year has a special character for NIAS because this year, 50 years ago, in September 1971, the first fellows cohort started in Wassenaar, in the NIAS premises in Wassenaar. So it is 50 years ago that NIAS started this great adventure that we are still part of. So today we are not only celebrating the opening of the academic year, and we're not only here to welcome the new fellows, but we're also here to celebrate 50 years of academic freedom at NIAS. And to do so, we have invited some very special guests who will share with us their thoughts on the importance of academic freedom, and especially also to reflect on, with us on the role of institutes of advanced study all over the world, because we're not the only one, the only institute of advanced study in the world. What challenges these kind of institutes face in order to cherish, harbor, foster such freedom. So before I welcome the speakers of this afternoon, I would like to give a very warm welcome to our new fellows. We are really extra delighted to have you here, because last year it was Corona, we had a lockdown, we were not able to really physically enjoy the informal gatherings, the informal encounters that we are allowed to have now. So thank you all for coming from abroad, from the Netherlands, and it's great to have you on board. And this fellows cohort promises to be as special as ever, because we have this year academic and artistic researchers from more than 15 countries, with more than 18 disciplinary backgrounds, and we have a very young group. For the first time in our existence, we only have an average age of 47. So it is actually really great to see that such young people, early career, mid-career, talented scholars, artists, authors, journalists, know to find NIAS, and that you have applied for a fellowship, and that you are seeking, just like us, for this place, time and space for collaborative learning and focusing on your dream project. Last year, an alumnus confided in me. He was also only 47, and he said, I always thought that NIAS was a place for retired and tired scholars. But it turns out to be a very lively and vibrant environment. And so I guess that this image is perhaps partly true for NIAS in the early days, that it was a bit older group, perhaps, and indeed we do have only a few retired researchers each year. But one aspect of this image, of this observation, is unfortunately still true. And that is that we notice that many of the fellows who come to NIAS are actually really tired. They are very tired indeed, from the many obligations, the many tasks they have during their daily lives in academia, especially, that for them the main reason to come to NIAS is to finally have time to read, finally have time to rethink all these basic assumptions, disciplinary methods that we hardly have time to think about given the pressures that come with academia nowadays. And also it is a little bit worrisome that sometimes fellows even indicate that they came to NIAS to regain their enthusiasm, to regain their curiosity, and to know again why they became a scholar or a researcher in the first place. So I'm really proud to say that NIAS has indeed become this researcher's paradise, and that is exactly what we aim to be and what we aim to offer to our fellows. But at the same time, we do believe that some of the pressures that are on the shoulders of the fellows when they enter NIAS should be lifted before they come to NIAS in a way. And today, our speakers will also briefly shed light on these burdens on the shoulders of researchers and how these pressures impede researchers sometimes to be free to do research on their own terms, to do this on the basis of their intuition, on the basis of their curiosity. And they will reflect with us on how these impediments form actually a threat to academia and the artistic world at large. But now let's start with today's program, which I'm thrilled to host. And the opening talk will be held by our NIAS director, Willem Duyvendak. And his speech will be followed by 3 other speeches, online and here on site, by the president of the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Science, Ineke Sluiter, who will be on screen today. But here present with us we have Robbert, Dijkgraaf, director of the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, United States of America. And we have Nadia Al-Bagdadi, who is the former president of the NIAS network of European Institutes for Advanced Study, and she is the director of the Institute for Advanced Study at the Central European University in Hungary. But first, may I ask for a warm applause for our director, Willem Duyvendak.
Hello. These days, we are kind of used, these COVID days, to check in on each other medically, right? So in that recent tradition, what is this? It was surgery yesterday, postponed due to COVID, because of, let's be totally honest, sprawling fingers. Or more philosophically, my fingers have their own will. They grow in directions of their own choosing. Or in NIAS jargon, my fingers don't obey, they are curiosity-driven. And there's just one answer to this, right? I have to discipline them in a Foucauldian way, and that happened yesterday. Dear colleagues and guests from near and far, very welcome to this opening of the academic year, where we celebrate 50 years of academic freedom. What is the meaning of academic freedom today? To answer this question, it might be helpful to reintroduce the distinction made by philosopher Isaiah Berlin between negative and positive freedom. Simply put, the distinction between freedom from and the freedom to. If we apply Berlin's concepts in this way, it looks as if in the past decades the emphasis was mostly put on the freedom from in order to protect academic freedom. Freedom from interferences in academia by politicians, by the market, or by social media users. They all have been criticized, and let's be clear about that, rightly so, for being intrusive, as imposing their logic on academia and thereby seeking specific outcomes, which are indeed a threat to academic freedom. There are many good reasons to value mobilizations to protect academia's autonomy, to keep it free from. As we will hear this afternoon, academic freedom, like artistic freedom, is under threat in many countries around the world. These threats come mostly from politicians and state bureaucracies, but more recently from social media as well. Scholars are targeted and often physically threatened. We have to be free from those threats. In this idea of academic freedom as free from, spatial metaphors often dominate. We have to keep distance from other spheres, such as the political or the economic realm. In many countries, this ideal of a separate sphere materialized in campuses, far from the hustle and bustle of non-academic life. Institutes for advanced study were often even more isolated, the most situated at a distance from the world. When we read the history of the Institute for Advanced Study, we come across many terms that describe this institute as secluded places, as ideal places not affected by the outside world, a scholarly haven, a paradise, in some as places of non-interference. When we look at NIAS, we see that for much of its history, fellows lived and worked together in a villa in Wassenaar. NIAS, until 2016, was located in an incredibly isolated location. It was cut off from the rest of the country by dunes and the North Sea on the one side, and on the other side, a barely functioning bus service to Leiden and The Hague. A fellow described NIAS in Wassenaar as, and I quote, a beacon of enlightened liberalism under the tallest trees of the world, a monastic order, a withdrawal from reality, a state of being in between, no longer bound by previous norms, end of quote. And for much of NIA's existence, this isolation defined its self-conception. This idea of liberty in autonomy did not only materialize in the place, but also in the setup of our institutes and all other institutes for advanced study. A key ingredient being the blue sky principle, the notion that fellows propose to study a topic of their own choosing. The blue sky principle stems from the very same belief that academics should define their own research agenda, not politics, economics, or academic bureaucrats. This principle is more important than ever before. Compared to some decades ago, research today is predominantly financed by earmarked money. Academia itself, Fenneke already spoke about it, has become incredibly pressured, full of expectations regarding themes, pace, productivity, and impact. What NIAS now offers is not only a retreat from the outside world, but also a retreat from the burden and pressure of academia itself. In that sense, an Institute for Advanced Study all Institute for Advanced Study embody the ultimate idea of freedom from. And today, there are many threats from both inside and outside academia. This idea of a safe haven, a safe space, of being distant, was, however, not just a response to external threats, but also inspired by a positive idea of academic freedom, the freedom to. If scholars have the freedom to do things they aspire to, they will be far more creative than when they are constrained. The freedom from is a necessary condition for the freedom to thrive. It might be tempting, given the actual threats, to further withdraw, to look for super safe spaces, to build our own bubbles, our homogeneous spots where we don't feel threatened but are not challenged either. I guess that is not what the philosophy of an Institute for Advanced Studies is or should be. The freedom from was not meant to isolate ourselves among like-minded people, but to facilitate unexpected encounters, interdisciplinary cooperation, and collective learning across various fields. The freedom from, then, should rather be used to develop new insights, resulting from the interactions among fellows with hugely different backgrounds. Being externally exclusive, keeping the threats at distance, should go hand in hand with being internally inclusive and as diverse as possible. We, academics and artists, flourish when we get constructive criticism, when we are confronted with unknown worlds, divergent perspectives, a plurality of paradigms and epistemologies. We actually love the confrontation of opinions, the exchanges of ideas and experiences. We want to be free from in order to be free to raise all possible questions, to doubt, to rethink our projects, to rewrite our articles and books. We cherish the freedom to challenge each other, to provoke, to think the unthinkable. That happens best in a world with diverse voices, where people come together not to compete, but to cooperate. I do not claim that NIAS has always been the most diverse haven on earth. But a haven it was, and hopefully still is. Every year now, step by step, we aim to become that diverse place of free thinkers from all over the world, from so many disciplines of scholars and artists. I have great admiration and gratitude towards all individuals and institutions who for the past 50 years have made NIAS in what it is today, and I very much look forward to the next 50 years. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Willem Duyvendak. Give him another hand of applause. That was a great opening speech. Now I welcome to the screen Ineke Sluiter, who is the president of the Royal Academy, and we will listen to her now.
Dear colleagues, on behalf of the board of the Koninklijke Nederlandse Academie van Wetenschappen, the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences, a warm welcome to all of you. Welcome at the beginning of this academic year 21-22 to NIAS, the Netherlands Institute for Advanced Study in the Humanities and Social Sciences. This year, NIAS is celebrating its 50th anniversary and therefore 50 years of academic freedom, its very raison d'être. This was why NIAS was founded and created, as an intellectual haven for curiosity-driven research. Academic research is not only central to the very existence of NIAS, it is a vital concern for our whole academy, the KNAW, and in fact for any free and open society. A recent report by our Standing Committee for the Freedom of Scientific Pursuit defined it somewhat narrowly as a freedom for the faculty of academic institutions to perform their academic research, disseminate their findings, and teach. In the past, our academy has frequently called out situations abroad where academic institutions or our academic colleagues in those countries suffered under non-democratic and oppressive regimes or were otherwise at risk. But there are many less obtrusive but no less damaging ways in which academic freedom can suffer. And it would be a mistake to focus on the faraway and close our eyes to what's going on under our noses. Academic freedom not only means that governments and institutional boards refrain from interfering with it or from failing to protect it in the appropriate ways, it also presupposes the mental space to think. But this space can be severely reduced, and free and creative thought can be suffocated by making people work under constant pressure of innumerable tasks and assignments, administrative ones, even tasks related to the teaching that we love, but that can become a burden when the rhythm of the academic year is too relentlessly focused on it. We need time to think, to do our research, to concentrate, to experience a sigh of intellectual relief. The time to feel the founts of creativity bubble up again, to read, to discuss, to be nourished intellectually. Such invaluable time is a precondition for true academic freedom, and NIAS is dedicated to providing that time, that mental space, and that oxygen for the brain. 50 years of such academic freedom at NIAS. A topic and an institution worth celebrating. In the spirit of the Olympic Games, I wish you the most inspiring and creative year yet.
That was Ineke Sluiter. It was great to have her here present with us this way. Now I would like to invite our two special guests, Robbert Dijkgraaf, Director of the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, and Nadia Al-Bagdadi, who is the Director of the Institute for Advanced Study at the Central European University in Hungary. Please sit down. Robbert, you can start, and then afterwards we will have a short conversation. Robbert Dijkgraaf.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, it's wonderful to be here with you. Actually, it's my first trip, transatlantic trip in 2 years, and I feel a little bit like the light in the refrigerator. You open the door, and it goes on. I arrive, and life starts again here, not only here at NIAS, but in the academic community in the country as a whole. So, warm congratulations first to NIAS on the occasion of the 50th anniversary, and blessings from your older sister in Princeton. The Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton was the realization of a dream of its first director, Abram Flexner. It was meant, the word was already mentioned, a paradise of scholars, a place where one could dedicate oneself to the pure pursuit of knowledge, no disturbances or obligations. I think it was and still is more defined by the absence than the presence of things. No teaching, no committees, no labs, no instructions from governments or industry. A point of reflection outside the plane, as far removed from the real world as possible. And in many ways, this dream has turned out to be a great success. In Princeton, here in Amsterdam, and in the many other institutes. And we are proud of our more than 90 years of dedication to scholarship and research at the highest level. The research performed at the Institute has impacted the world. From electronic computers to the concept of containment in the Cold War. Currently, we have more than 6,000 former members active around the world who have benefited from this intellectual recharge. We are particularly proud that the idea of an institute itself has proven so fertile. There are literally hundreds of them around the world, and remarkably, there's a huge amount of biodiversity. Mirroring the words of Tolstoy, all universities are to first approximation alike, but every Institute for Advanced Study is completely distinct because there are so many things in way you can be not something. Each make different choices of disciplines, funding models, locations, intellectual goals, interactions with society. But the common denominator is the intellectual freedom to pursue knowledge in and by itself, unbounded by applications. Essentially the absence of the thought police. Now, in this paradise of scholars, something special happened in February 2017. President Trump had just been inaugurated, and one of his first actions of his administration was the establishment of the so-called travel ban, mostly directed towards Muslim countries. This measure took the country and the world in shock, particularly our own community. With so many scholars from around the world united. The United States, which has a history and a self-image as a beacon of freedom and a refuge for scholars at risk, suddenly showed an ugly image to the world. The travel ban came with brutal immigrant deportations, limits to scientific inquiry, drastic cuts in funding in the arts and humanities, and just a general attack on truth and the facts themselves. Those months in 2017, we organized several town hall meetings to share our concerns. They had a therapeutic action. And then the scholars on our campus did something quite remarkable. They decided to react to this emergency with their own tool, scholarship. A very diverse group of social scientists, historians, mathematicians, physicists felt the need to organize itself and dive deep into our archives to investigate how colleagues in previous generations had reacted to such distress and to find inspirations and learn lessons for the present and the future. As this group wrote, we believe that history does not repeat itself, but rather we seek to provide the community with sketches of scholarly lives and scientific cultures interrupted by nationalist forces of exclusion. That these lives and cultures managed to reconstruct themselves and enriched our common human heritage is thanks only to efforts to provide them with a sanctuary. Indeed, in 1933, only 3 years after its founding, the NIAS was presented by a unique opportunity. Certainly, many renowned scholars from the upper echelons of the German university system had to leave Nazi Germany, fearing for their lives. And this crisis of refugee scholars presented Flexner, the director, with this opportunity. It was not immediately obvious that he could and wanted to act. The Institute had already pulled an extraordinary coup in recruiting Albert Einstein and John von Neumann shortly before Hitler came to power. But how far should they continue recruiting additional émigrés? Flexner initially was ambivalent on this topic. He wrote to the mathematician Veblen in March of 1933, Mr. and Mrs. Bamberger, these were the founding philanthropists, were very anxious from the outset that no distinction should be made as to respect race, religion, nationality, etc. And of course, I'm thoroughly sympathetic with their point of view. But on the other hand, if we do not develop America, who's going to do it? And the question arises, how much do we ought to do for others? And how much to make sure that civilization in America advances? America first, avant la lettre. And he continued, we're certainly in a fix. We're unable to care for our own younger men. It was a very undiverse time. And now we are pressed by applications from foreign countries. It seems to me clear that we must, in the first place, endeavor to find work for those whom we have encouraged to train themselves. And indeed, in these kind of depression years, there was a great need for jobs in the United States. But after expressing these initial hesitations, Flexner was enlightened. He followed the urging of his influential faculty, particularly, of course, Einstein, but also Veblen, in seeking to provide a haven for these new refugees. In association with the Emergency Committee in Aid of Displaced Foreign Scholars, the Rockefeller Foundation, and many other foundations, NIAS became a leading role for this far-sighted, if ever elite, rescue effort. It became a kind of intellectual Ellis Island. Small grants allowed many European scholars to obtain visa to escape Nazi Germany. Ironically, the founders of the Institute, the Bamberger family, owned a large department store that dealt in distressed merchandise. And now their philanthropy was certainly dealing in distressed scholars, geniuses at bargain basement prices. And Flexner wrote in his director's report in 1939, quote, 50 years from now, the historians looking backward will, if we act with courage and imagination, report that during our time, the center of gravity is scholarship, moved across the Atlantic. But by the way, he also writes that these centers of gravity, intellectual gravity, always move around the globe. Einstein was an incredibly powerful person in this arrangement. In fact, Einstein and Flexner often had a very difficult relationship. When we republished Flexner's famous essay, The Usefulness of Useless Knowledge, I thought it would be a good idea to have a quote of Einstein in front of it. Wouldn't it be wonderful to publish a book right now and says, this Albert Einstein, I really love this author. And I looked in the thick book of Einstein quotes, and there was one quote about Abraham Flexner, his director. I said, oh, we are in luck. And then it said, Abraham Flexner, one of my few enemies. And the reason was that when Einstein was on the boat, actually, from Belgium to New York, Flexner sent him a cable saying, make no political statements, keep a low profile. And when President Roosevelt invited him to the White House, Flexner intercepted the invitation and say, Professor Einstein, a very important scientist, you should focus on the scholarship and not be... He was very afraid that, in some sense, Einstein would shed a light on this small institute and make it politically kind of dangerous. Einstein, of course, didn't back down. I like the fact that he crafted his statements as careful as he did his formula. In fact, He worked very, very hard on his statements, and then his secretary typed them out, and he cut them out and he put them in a little box. I like to say he was tweeting 50 years before Twitter was introduced. His political engagement was again called upon during the McCarthy years. In the November 1954, which was at the high point of Joseph McCarthy's campaign against supposed communist infiltration of various branches of the US government, he wrote a letter to a magazine in which he declared that were he a young man again, he would not try to become a scientist. Quote, I would rather choose to be a plumber or a peddler in the hope to find that modest degree of independence still available under the present circumstances. McCarthy was quick to react to Einstein's stand. He told the media that whether his name is Einstein or Jones, the giver of such advice was undoubtedly an enemy of America, a disloyal American, and not a good American. But Einstein was not deterred. In March 1954, he wrote, "It's the right to search for truth and to publish and to teach what one holds to be true." He regretted that in this dark age, freedom of teaching, mutual exchange of opinions, and freedom of the press and other media of communications are encroached upon and obstructed. At the same time, the director of the institute at that time, Robert Oppenheimer, was himself a target of the McCarthy Inquisition. He was somehow squeezed by the hinge of history, being both a loyal servant to his country, developing the atom bomb, and enabling a victory of the US, but also being firm in his stance for international collaboration and against the further development of nuclear arms. He was accused to be a communist and famously lost his security clearance. Earlier he was celebrated as the world's most famous scientist, perhaps with the exclusion of his colleague Einstein, appearing on the cover of Time magazine. In June of 1954, he was again on the cover, but now with a different byline, quote, "Beyond loyalty, the harsh requirement of security." These days, we see growing attacks of academic freedom around the world. And I think that's why our fellows were so inspired by their own local history. I would say the free intellectual space is shrinking, as previous speakers said, in terms of attacks on institutions and attacks on the culture of science itself and scholarship. Governments and political movements more and more want to impose their views. Populists claim to represent the true views of the nation and to silence other voices. Facts are pushed away by alternative facts. Scientific findings are undercut by sowing doubt and the spread of disinformation, often disguised as the product of science and scholarship itself. In the United States, where Trumpism is still very much active and alive, although not in the White House anymore, luckily, these attacks are often framed as a reaction to an excess of political correctness in academia. A favorite technique is to shoot the messenger, bringing uncomfortable news. I think the great challenge for the academic community will be to preserve and strengthen this academic freedom, to keep expanding our views, allowing as much different perspectives as possible. Keep the thought police out, also among ourselves. It's never our aim to be comfortable, to reach a consensus, to keep asking difficult questions. How can more knowledge, digging deeper and uncovering more layers, be in any way threatening? Knowledge is the only natural resource, it's being said, that grows when being used. It should be the aim of any institution of higher learning to increase its intellectual biodiversity, both in depth and in breadth. If someone calls a university or calls the academia, ask what the university thinks about a certain matter, the answer should be, to whom can I direct your call? Just let me know which opinion you want to hear. Now, what can a role of an Institute for Advanced Study be in this large and complicated world? Isn't it just a drop in the proverbial bucket? Is the whole idea of creating a bubble of freedom, a platonic environment, an intellectual playground not irrelevant and perhaps even misleading? Creating a fake sense of security and comfort? Why create a paradise for scholars in such an ugly world? I want to end with a little anecdote about Albert Hirschman, one of the most important social scientists and philosophers of the 20th century and a long-term faculty member at our institute in Princeton. In his early years, Hirschman was blown around the world by the winds of war. In many ways, he was the last of that distinguished line of European refugee scholars, beginning with that older Albert, that found a home in Princeton. He was born in Berlin. He fled Nazi Germany, barely 18 years old. He fought for France, then he fought in the Spanish War, and then he helped some 2,000 refugees escape in the south of France in 1940, during World War II. Some of these refugees were Marc Chagall, Marcel Duchamp, and Hannah Arendt. He then joined the US Army in North Africa and Italy, followed by a most distinguished academic career, to his own surprise, by the way, which included positions at Yale, Columbia, Harvard, and finally ending in 1972, arriving at the Institute. His life was marked by courage, physical courage and intellectual courage, and what he liked to call trespassing. The idea of trespassing, he said, is basic to my thinking. Attempts to confine me to a specific area make me unhappy. When it seems that an idea can be verified in another field, I'm so happy to venture in that direction. We should all strive to be trespassers, crossing boundaries and borders. Hirschman was a lifelong lover of mountain hikes and once reached the summit of a mountain in the French Alps with one of his grandsons. There, the little boy found a rock naturally carved in the perfect shape of a chair. The young boy sat down and decided not to move any further. He had reached perfection. Why should one move further? So how did the great and wise philosopher solve this problem? Well, Hirschman took his mountain axe and chipped off a small part of the rock and put it piece in his grandson's pocket. With this one gesture, he achieved two things. The resting spot was no longer perfect, and of course, it never was perfect. But that small part of the lost perfection he could take down into the real world as an inspiration for future hikes. So I think this is a beautiful metaphor for NIAS and all our other lovely institutes for advanced study around the world. It's something that you can actually take with you if you spend some time here. And I hope that all of you who are here today take that inspiration with you to your home institution and make the world a little bit better and a little bit more free. I think the true value of paradise only became clear after people have left. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert Dijkgraaf. Now our next speaker, Nadia Al-Bagdadi.
What a pleasure and what an honor it is to speak at this joyful occasion, celebrating half a century of Europe's most distinguished and, as we learned, the vibrant institutes of advanced studies. Many congratulations to the director, to the staff, and the fellows who have the pleasure and honor to be here for this academic year. But what a disenchantment and worry it is to address an issue and a threat that have returned forcefully to the agenda, the attack on academic freedom, in familiar ways by the usual suspects, and in new ways by new and rather unexpected adversaries. Thus the question, who's afraid of academic freedom, is neither a rhetorical flourish, nor a particular new question, as we also just learned. It is a pressing reflection upon the rising tide of alarm in a changing political and intellectual atmosphere in which academic freedom is curtailed and under attack, in some places dramatically so. This threat relates to concrete institutional and cognitive conditions under which academic freedom can be exercised. It relates to nothing less than the conceptual basis which safeguards academic freedom as a value and as a social good. And we heard, I think, from both or three previous speakers how true that is. Why does it matter then? because much is at stake. Some among us have experienced this assault already at first hand. For others, the issue remains still an abstract challenge. My central contention is, however, that it is the simultaneous emergence of assault from multiple directions that define the main change of academic freedom at its very core today. Let me briefly state what I understand academic freedom to entail. Academic freedom possesses a twofold property. It relates to the autonomy of institutions, which in turn guarantee free scientific inquiry. It is this relationship that defines, in knowledge-based societies, the importance of both, of scholarship and research, and of institutions of advanced research and higher education. That is the Humboldt old and well-approved model. Modern societies need institutions which provide a protective yet autonomous institutional framework for the open quest of science, for critical thinking, and for innovative research. Secondly, it entails that there is a cognitive correlate of equal weight to this institutional autonomy. If institutional autonomy is about stability and security, academic freedom as cognitive act rests on different premises. Integral to the process and ultimately to the success of free research is not only their capacity to produce cognitive products, but also to deal with uncertainty as open, curiosity-driven inquiry. This perspective then entails the recognition also of vulnerability and of failure as part and parcel of scientific endeavor, or the other side of scientific success. These dimensions are intrinsically political and define the tenor of my brief intervention. Freedom of critical inquiry and the autonomy of institutions concerned with cognitive goods are thus unique. They are unique precisely in that they are enabling values. These enabling conditions apply universally, and they are as important here in Amsterdam as they are in Jakarta, across national and regional borders. And where better to make that point than at NIAS, as we heard, that is a truly international place and space. In the same vein, it is no longer conscionable to define academic freedom as being primarily a European issue, or Anglo-Saxon issue, as we heard just a minute ago. Such views succumb to narrow arguments about origins instead of recognizing how academic freedom and the idea of autonomy of cognitive institutions emerged universally as a result of complex, at times violent, political, social, and intellectual struggles. Who then is afraid of academic freedom? I see three configurations at work: from the outside, from the inside, and from inside out. The assault from the outside, the most tangible and blatant assault, comes from the authoritarian state or para-state politics. They trigger, directly or indirectly, the persecution of scientists, scholars, critical thinkers, their temporary or long-term exclusion from universities, or indeed their migration and exile. We've seen this in a historical perspective, but we are also seeing this today. In Europe, historically, it was the cognitive autonomy of universities granted initially by states such as Prussia, a state very far from being democratic, that from the early 19th century on enabled scientific inquiry and advances in the natural no less than in the social and human sciences. The 20th century saw the reverse under fascist and also under communist regimes. Thus, when in 1988 some 400 rectors of European universities signed the Carta Magna Universitatum in Bologna, this moment was thought to define more than just some lofty aspiration when it declared institutional autonomy and academic freedom to be the fundamental values and principles of the university, of which our institutes are in whatever distance or closeness part. Since then, though, again, much has happened. The paradox of academic freedom is that, like many other types of rights, it depends on state protection in order to be free of external intrusion. Intrusion from the state, corporate entities, societal movements, or any other agency or interested party. The agreement, or at least understanding, in which the relationship between the university as autonomous cognitive and physical spaces of science and Wissenschaft, and state and society requires a certain distance and disengagement. In authoritarian context, distance is eliminated. All authoritarian assaults are alike in this, that they turn upon its head the fact that universities or institutes serve their societies best when they produce cognitive goods by means appropriate to cognitive rather than social or political pressure. The case of Lex CEU, Central European University, showed this very well. It entailed the withdrawal of accreditation and subsequent expulsion from Hungary of our university. But this was only one move in the broader move to dismantle institutional autonomy across the board and the Gleichschaltung of institutions from the Academy of Science to the universities in line with the overall remodeling of the Hungarian state. Those afraid of academic freedom are testing, or more than testing, this balance between state protection and state control. Secondly, the assault from inside out. Of a very different scale and nature is another threat against autonomy and freedom, which manifests itself as internal institutional erosion. It operates structurally and not necessarily with an ideological armature, but I'm not too certain about this and about unintended consequences arising. The second threat is an outgrowth of neoliberal transformations of central features of the university, of research and higher education, in which cognitive goods are commodified and managed accordingly. Scientific research in universities are customized and in their activities categorized managerially, overseen by an exponential and hitherto unknown expansion of administrative bodies, expressed in the language of management consultants, conceived in quantifiable terms of efficiency, productivity, and measurability. Academic freedom becomes an exotic residue of times past. Scientific relevance and usefulness of particular research questions or even entire disciplines are re-evaluated using parameters unconnected to cognitive purpose. This is no longer the invisible hand of the market, but the alliance, I would see, between market and bureaucracy. Third, the assault from within. While the first two configurations relate to institutional autonomy as enabling condition and value, the third group of adversaries is of an altogether different character, and we heard already a bit about that. It emerged in recent years from within, curtailing academic freedom in the name of other freedoms, an increasingly problematic situation. Defenders of minority rights or subaltern social, cultural, or other groups reinforce, paradoxically, dated ideas and rules connected with descent and blood about who is entitled, morally or culturally or else, to perform what and which kind of research, study, and teaching. Here, academic freedom is turned into its opposite. starting in the Anglo-Saxon world, spreading fast from an initially all too justified, very well-grounded and argued position of critique of privilege. This trend has started to establish closed containers and agendas for and of inquiry built on mimetic and identitarian principles to which cognitive purpose often seems irrelevant. Since these debates are dominant in much of national and international public domains, I don't need to go here for any examples given the audience. The fine but crucial line which disallows lack of respect and recognition for the other and the foreclosing of space and spaces designed for scientific engagement, this fine line seems to have frayed. And this is another attack on academic freedom which we ought to take quite seriously. It is in this sense, then, that the political and legal attacks on the present moment differ from earlier infringements, from the Enlightenment with her battles over right and wrongs between church and state, to the reformist movements of the 1960s. It is the multifaceted and the simultaneous assault that signal the difference to earlier infringements. In most of Europe, as in other parts of the world, academic freedom has and still is taken for granted. To be clear, not as a universal right per se, which it is not, but for having acquired the status of an indispensable enabling power and value. As such, it has long set the yardstick for free and critical inquiry and research, or has it? The renewed and pressing need to protect academic freedom seems to suggest otherwise, as does the failure to do so. Think of Hungary, Russia, Turkey, and its abolition of academic freedom altogether. These are extreme forms of fear, of critical and free thinking. The new identitarian illiberalism from the inside, however, equally disqualifies the free pursuit of knowledge and truth at the very foundation of academic research, as it also redefines the link between society and Wissenschaft. To come to a close, why is it important to speak about academic freedom and its adversaries? It matters because to us, academic freedom and trust are at the very core of our vocation in research and in teaching. And it matters to us as citizens when academic freedom, understood in the broad sense discussed here, falters, because then one pillar of society falls. Is there then a cure? Well, in different measures, with different treatments, and in different places. Rooted in an international alliance and solidarity among institutions of advanced study and teaching, in an effort to protect and to interfere with robust institutional reinforcement and resolute individual and collective intervention, which dare to go against curtailing critical research and, when necessary, against the mainstream. And we heard a lot about how our sister institutes are engaged in this. Institutes of advanced studies are indeed ideal places for temporary withdrawal and seclusion from the world, if only for a short while, obeying an imperative which is preeminently cognitive. Blissful, undisturbed leisure and concentration for writing and thinking, in splendid isolation and in conversation with other fellows. This does not mean to turn one's back to the world. Even if you think you are leaving the world will not leave you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nadia Al-Bagdadi. Here's some water for you. So, thank you for these important interventions. I'm really grateful that you were able to come here from Hungary, from the United States, to share with us your thoughts and concerns. And you used the word cure, and I would like to elaborate a little bit more on that. So, you are both directors of two institutes for advanced study in very different contexts, United States versus Hungary. What would you say is the main challenge for your institution regarding academic freedom? What is the main challenge that you are facing now in Hungary, Nadia?
You want me to start?
Yeah, please.
Well, I mean, our cure is we are, after the famous Koning in Budapest had been already closed by the Hungarian government, we are also partner of a university which, as I mentioned, has been already expelled for what it does and what it represents as a critical university. So where is the cure? Where do you want to start? We are, as an institute, still in Budapest. We do expect and would see as a cure to indeed keep open the doors for those who still dare coming. What we do see is indeed that, and here I see this as much as we discuss this as an academic issue, that it is a highly political issue, that certain atmospheres and certain cultures of academic exchange do alter with time when you are operating in an atmosphere of thought control or other forms of surveillance. So the cure for us would be not to be afraid, but this is said very easily if you have a safe position or if you say, okay, I can go wherever I want to go. So it is certainly not an individual solution that you can find. It requires a political, it requires an institutional. In our case, we would have hoped a European decision to help, but as we know, this did not happen, and it is also not happening now. Right? There is the awareness, and I think Willem also spoke about this before. There is a very clear awareness, right, that you do have to act as European institutions as much as you are national institutions. And if this awareness is not there, the cure is not going to come. At least I see for the moment that this is quite a struggle still to have.
Yes. Let's talk about that a little bit more later. But for you, what would you say is the main challenge for your institute at this moment regarding academic freedom, and how do you cure this?
I think there are two threats. One threat is that certainly, I think in the United States, the like immigration policy, just to which extent the country is welcoming people from the outside world. For instance, to give an example, the relationship with China is becoming very tense and difficult. So to be truly a global community is challenged. I think a more long-term challenge is certainly, I think, for us, because we are largely supported by philanthropy, that means by society. Does society recognize the qualities that your institution bring, and are people willing to support you in that? And that's this, I think, this general thinking in society that scholarship, science is seen more and more as something very directed, something very immediate. And so if you try to make the case for open-ended research, question is, will this still kind of resonate with society? And I think that's a more longer-term threat. But I think that's actually a threat that many of us share, because whether it's philanthropists or government ministries, I think we generally see a society tilting more towards the immediate benefits, the useful applications, which in some sense is very short-sighted.
And so I'm curious to hear a little bit more, because you say there are still fellows coming to your institute despite the environment, the tensed environment. You have still philanthropists supporting the institutes despite the kind of alternative, knowledge has come increasingly under attack, but still there are people who want to be part of this. What do you do that they still want to come, despite all the challenges and the fears that perhaps might be play a role?
Well, I think that's very evident. We do want to have the place to do our research, right? And there is also the need to be indeed in seclusion. And if you're in seclusion under high trees in Wassenaar, or you are in New York, or in Budapest, or in other places, as long as you can do this, that will be certainly an attraction. As long as institutes for advanced studies still provide this, the issue is, of course, that. As I said as well, I mean, you may want to push things for a while away from you in order to focus and to concentrate, but the world does not stop thinking about you and what you do. And this is where either we see this kind of, and I think this is something very positive, we see emerging indeed scholars who do remote things, I don't know, Byzantine vowel change, and nevertheless do realize that they are part of society that needs that kind of knowledge, and you need to make that translation. Why is it relevant? Maybe not to understand the grammatical laws, but something else that is important in conveying or in producing that knowledge. And I think this is why in places that are less blissful maybe than Amsterdam these days in summer and sunshine, than Budapest, which is under a different dark cloud, that there is this kind of aligning and wanting to align with scholars who are there. Robbert was just saying, right? I mean, this is a community of scholars. In that sense that we are a community of scholars that also happily disagrees about things, right? And that because we do see this as being what advances us, right? Rather than being flattered and being put to the side as a nice garniture for something. I think this is what makes also institutes like ours that are operating now under less favorable circumstances still a very attractive place.
Well, these are all wonderful things, but I would also say that, you know, one thing I notice is that what we have to do, certainly advocate more about the need for places like this, and somehow try to convince society. That's a very difficult, sometimes an uphill task, but I think there's a great opportunity for, I would say, a higher profile, both of these issues and the solutions, and I would say also within the academic community, thinking essentially about the architecture of our institutions. Obviously, they have to be strengthened. And I think, you know, it's an easy prediction that, you know, the production of knowledge will be coming under larger pressure because, in some sense, knowledge become more and more relevant to society. And so society needs the production of knowledge, but some of what we will bring will be unwelcome. And so I think we have to strengthen, so to say, the house in which we can build. And I think, you know, often I feel one of the great things that you know, scholarship and the academic community has, you know, you can only have freedom if you have a solid foundation and, you know, walls that are solid and a structure that's resistant and resilient and can move forward. And I feel as a community, that means that we have to spend perhaps a bit more time thinking about what that architecture is and what we need, so that we can provide this wonderful experience people will have here at NIAS. But of course, we want that to be that oxygen spread around the academic community and ideally even in society. So I think we should have kind of an expansive view about the role of basically the goods that we provide here to our fellows.
I would like to end our wonderful conversation. I would like to talk much more about this, and I bet the audience as well, but we have a great second part of the program. I would like to thank you, Robbert Dijkgraaf, Nadia Al-Bagdadi, very much for your presence and your speeches. Give them an applause. Thank you. Yes, so now before we move to 5 new fellows, I would like to present to you our former writer-in-residence and poet, the Dutch poet and author Hagar Peters, who will give a spoken word presentation for us. Hagar, welcome.
Ask yourself a question. That's where resistance begins. And then ask that question to someone else. These are words by the Dutch most renowned and still living poet Remco Kampert. And now, what do resistance and science have in common? Both start by asking a question. Both want to search further than the current situation presented as truth or real, and they do so out of curiosity or because of dissatisfaction with or doubt about the presentation of the situation, state, or condition. And do you know what? That's where poetry starts as well, or that's what I think. Maybe not. I'm asking you. You can think about it. Well, hello everybody. Nice to see you. I'm happy to be here. My name is Hager Peters. It was said. I am a writer, a poet. I was a NIAS fellow here 2 years ago. And I also published an English anthology. It was translated by Judith Wilkinson. And a large part of that anthology is about a figure I was named after, Hagar, the figure in the Bible, the first slave in the Bible. She was expelled because she was too stubborn as a slave. I don't know whether you know that story. It's in Genesis. It's a horrible story. And I wanted to show this Hagar as in today life. So I used her as a figure living as a housemaid with a couple a Western couple in the Netherlands. But I also wanted to show her as the symbol of all the people who have been expelled from their homelands because of the frank expression of their political opinions, sexual identity, their intellectual and scientific endeavors, out of curiosity, who seek political asylum in the Netherlands, but they're sent away or have to wait for years until they know whether they will be accepted as new citizens of our country. And I'm a little bit focusing on these poems now, and they are also a little bit about the lack of freedom. I start with the first one, In Their Shadow. No, I'm sorry, it's the wrong one. No, it's another one. This one. Lament of those who listen to war reports. Dust raised the days of the flesh. Flesh turned to dust. In the interim, rooms remained empty. Spring came, birds flew, bombs were hatched. We spilled Coca-Cola on newspapers all summer long. Let the voice on the radio rattle on. Music swiftly wiped out every news flash, and on my face lay your hand. Bombs didn't fall here. Another bottle of Coke toppled over. Your mouth went in search of the glass. The switch dimmed the radio voice. The dead floated away in the Coca-Cola and people were getting raped. We were busy loving, as if death were possible. Place of anticipation. The house of the exile is a house with doors that open and close in both directions so that arrival and departure take place in a single flowing movement as with a revolving door in the center of which the exile waits to be shut in. The house is not a dwelling place but a place of anticipation. All the rooms are waiting rooms. The sofa in the sitting room offers only a brief respite from pacing up and down. The literature in the bookcase is made of forms and contains no poetry, only ordinances. As final as the orders are, so indefinite are the days. The windows are windows through which a landscape can be traced that will no longer be visible and in which the vista of origin betrays itself. When the exile leaves his house, he follows the signs that say exit, which he'll encounter wherever he arrives. A last salute. Gentlemen, highly respected admirals of the fleet, vice admirals, rear admirals, you have done history a service, but you've been dismissed by the present. Dear commodores, captains and commanders, however high your standing once was, your class now is superfluous. Esteemed lieutenants and sub-lieutenants and highly regarded midshipmen, your honor has proved mortal, your uniforms are moth-eaten. All you can do now is march through eternity, salute the clouds, elevate yourselves to statues of an unshakable character. The All Saints flood has receded. The sea, though not convinced, has been contained by the embankment and now toes the line drawn by men. The shipworm, termite of the ocean, renowned underminer of dikes, hit rock bottom at Den Helder's unyielding seawall. Big guns drove the English back. Today, only the Navy knocks at the gate of your abandoned breastworks, blowing its own trumpet. In the museum. What map do we set our course by from here? The Italian portolan, so readily available in the museum? It's on every occasion or every ocean it depicts. It hung in a ship as the hole in its height testifies. Prehistoric drawing pins got their hooks into it. Thanks to it, slaves were traded, silkworms found and costly plants hatched. It sailed round Scylla and Charybdis, the Cyclops-eyed cliff, and circumvented the infinite whirlpool. Everywhere it came ashore safely. Now it hangs here smugly behind glass. Does it want to show me the way again? Of course, naturally, with love. But that no longer exists, I gather. Holland's Deluge, and this one you can read also as a poem about the sea level rise. In penury, the ancients built this land to what it is today. Enclosure dam and airport rose from the sea and pavestones from the streets. The youth are jigging underground. Masks hum, bells toll for a distant god to enter still. But in these lowlands the rain beats against rattling attic windows, and beneath them the sad monotonous fumbling in a bed, the predictable moaning, harder, faster, deeper boy, until the bedposts break, until the posts break and the dikes burst, flooding the polders from their thighs. And almost the last one. It's about a street in Groningen. It was, when you enter Groningen, you'll enter that street as well. And it used to be in the center of the Jewish quarter, till the Second World War, of course. And I wrote this memento of the Volkingenstraat in Groningen. Here your eyes study the house, fronts with their still quite recent commemorative art. And we practice not seeing anymore, not ever being able to look at it all anymore. And when we shop at one of the 57 retailers in this narrow street, tucked into the city like a hiding place, a secret cranny, we relive the never shopping anymore at the bankers, at the kosher horse butchers. We relive the never trading here in this street of trade, this gateway to the city and place of pilgrimage, where the synagogue has opened its doors again and dwelling built of durable stone in their simple presence eternalize the fact that life here is a reliving of the impermanence of life that was cut short in this street, that never stops in one of the numerous cafes here, where we are merry, we relive the end of that merriness for those who were deported in this street. But I'll end more optimistic. I'm sorry. I'll end with a poem I wrote after my stay at NIAS, which was, indeed, it was a paradise. I just tell you that it's going to be a paradise. For me it was, and I wrote it for a fellow, a friend I made at NIAS, and it was translated. And this is a part out of it, and it's called NIAS. NIAS, something magical was happening with that office. Everyone who came there was giving on entry through the gate their own halo. Only enlightened minds gathered at lunch. When you got downstairs, the tables were already manned by people deep in conversation. It was a homecoming. We all felt we were each other's kin. It's so strange in this time, when sitting together around a table has been banned, embracing has been banned. We did all that at the last possible moment. It was an island in time, off before and after for each one of us, in its own way a kind of sequestered existence. We said, we'll hold on to this, we'll carry it with us. Nobody can take this experience from us. This stays with us. It's the legacy of NIAS. We feared the dilution as time went on, of new isolation, of being sequestered, and as for the coming of COVID-19, none of us could have envisaged it then. And they all flew back to their own universities, but are still close to me. Well, I hope you'll have the same experience. I wish it, and I wish you also a lot of good luck. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hagar Peters. That was really wonderful. Thank you. Okay, now I would like to present to you 5 of our new fellows who we invited to give a short pitch on academic freedom and how this plays a role in their current work in their NIAS project. And I will first ask to the stage Rahul, then we will see on screen Stella Nyanzi, then Lukas Verburgt, Ghazwan Yaghi, and Sarah de Lange will speak for us. Give them a warm applause. Thank you.
Hello. Although this is not quite the subject of my talk, I just want to begin by saying that taking up a fellowship at NIAS involved applying for a visa, which took a bit of work and more than a little bit of stress. It was a reminder that borders are themselves an impediment to the free exchange of ideas on which everything that we do is premised. And I'm really grateful for the efforts of the NIAS staff, many of whom are here, in helping us to navigate these challenges to make it possible for us to even be here. So thank you. In May this year, at the height of the most recent war in Gaza, a colleague at a Dutch university sent me a Palestine solidarity statement and asked if the department at the British university in which I worked at the time might be interested in signing it. We had historically never signed political statements as a department, the practice having been for individuals rather than the collective to take political positions. Yet the strength of feeling about the death and destruction suffered by Palestinians was such that on this occasion, we decided exceptionally to sign the statement condemning the Israeli assault on Gaza. Yet if you were to look at the list of signatories to that statement today, you would not see our name. When our management heard that we were about to sign, they forbade us from doing so, claiming that such a gesture would unacceptably take a political stance on behalf of the institution as a whole. This claim was puzzling, given that the institution had taken admirable political stances in the past, on Black Lives Matter in the summer of 2020, for example. Somehow it seemed a little more difficult for us to say that Palestinian lives matter. One reason for this fear, of course, is the concern that criticism of Israel might be seen to be anti-Semitic. This concern has been heightened by recent efforts to broaden acceptance of a definition of anti-Semitism promulgated by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. For many supporters of Palestinian self-determination, some aspects of this definition seem to preclude legitimate criticisms of Israel by conflating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. And criticism of the definition has itself been construed as anti-Semitic, as some members of the UK Labour Party have discovered to their detriment. To bring these issues up is not to deny the existence of anti-Semitism and the absolute necessity of fighting against it, but it is to illustrate the ways in which free speech can be impeded by being construed as hate speech. Conversely, hate speech can be protected, even championed, in the guise of free speech. The UK Conservative government has recently introduced a higher education freedom of speech bill, which imposes free speech duties on universities and student unions and gives individuals the right to claim compensation through the courts if those duties are breached. It proposes to set up a new free speech director who will be charged with investigating instances of no platforming and so-called cancel culture. It doesn't seem to matter that the number of such instances is minuscule, nor do state champions of free speech appear to recognize the many ways in which their own policies undermine the very values they claim to cherish. Instead, free speech has been weaponized by the right and its ideologues in the state to enable and protect the airing of racist and especially trans-misogynistic speech in the UK context by speakers whom students are trying to keep off their campuses. So you can be quite authoritarian in the guise of being a champion of free speech. The ease with which free speech and hate speech can morph into one another forces us to confront the question, I think a very difficult question, of whether free speech is a good in itself, even if it reinforces the unequal distribution of power in society and the othering of unpopular minorities. Without pretending that it will be easy to address such questions, my hope is that institutions like NIAS might enable us to grapple with them in an atmosphere free from the rancor that seems to saturate the public spheres of so many of the places that we come from. When I'm teaching, I try to hold my students to a sort of principle of compassion. This requires them to place the most generous construction possible on the things that they hear in the classroom. The principle doesn't save us from having uncomfortable conversations, and it certainly doesn't guarantee that we will reach consensual answers on the questions that vex us. But by helping to create an affective space in which we might be able to disagree without losing sight of each other's humanity, it helps us to make a good start. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Stella Nyanzi. Police arrested me many times for peaceful protests against oppression. I was also imprisoned twice in maximum security prison as a political prisoner of conscience. Political repression is a signature of authoritarian dictatorships. When dissidents and regime critics are punished, academics become lambs for slaughter. Many critical scholars are subjected to demonization, demotion, dismissal from jobs, denial of access to academic resources, including space and community, detention, disappearance, degrading torture during interrogation, and even death. For 5 years, I was repeatedly suspended from my tenured position as a permanent and pensionable research fellow at Makerere University in Uganda, because I criticized the failures and excesses of the president's wife, who is also the Minister of Education. She directed university administrators to transfer me from my research unit in the social sciences to a teaching position in the School of Law, a position I was not qualified for. Although I won 3 different appeals against these suspensions at the academic tribunal, the university never reinstated me back into my job because of fear of reprisals from the tyrannical president and his nepotistic wife. Instead, I received threats to my life. When I sought protection from the police, I was arrested, remanded, slapped with trumped-up charges, prosecuted, convicted, and sentenced to 18 months in prison. When I was a prisoner, I suffered a miscarriage due to torture by prison wardresses. Supplementing the loss of my pregnancy in prison, I also contracted urinary tract infections and my kidneys got poisoned. During my trial, state prosecutors applied to the court to subject me to involuntary mental examination in order to discredit me as a government critic. In addition to state surveillance and monitoring of critical creative scholars, authoritarian dictatorships are also conservative. Consequently, they discourage, censor, and gag independent research and autonomous inquiry into non-normative forms of humanness, because in order to thrive, dictators rely on oppressive hierarchies including misogyny, patriarchy, homophobia, imperialism, financial opacity, exploitative extraction of natural resources, authoritarianism, and many such others. As an African queer scholar, competitive research funding I had secured was confiscated. It was kept in an uninstitutional bank account and later returned to the funders. Some of my research projects were criminalized as promotion of homosexuality in a highly homophobic legislative regime. My research data was seized by police officers during numerous raids on my home and office. At the university, I was widely ostracized for undertaking research on same-sex sexualities and non-conforming gender identities. All my research was published only outside Uganda. I have briefly highlighted that in dictatorial national contexts, such as my home country, Uganda, the pillars of academic freedom, including free expression, freedom of conscience and thought, and intellectual freedom, are highly threatened. Universities lose autonomy as centers of critical thought. Academic qualifications do not protect regime critics. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. So this was impressive. I will say what I have to say. Namely, I want to start this short talk about academic freedom by saying that I don't know exactly what academic freedom is. Or more precisely, to paraphrase Augustine, I know what it is when I'm not asked about it, but when asked, I no longer do. So rather than being disappointing and simply ending here, let me add that I believe it is very important not to know exactly what academic freedom is. For only when we do not pretend to know what it is can we begin to genuinely ask what it is and why it matters so much to us. Otherwise, any answer would merely repeat what's already presupposed in the question. It is only by daring to be ignorant that we can hope to become really knowledgeable. And this brings me to my highly tentative central point. I think that the essence of academic freedom, if it has an essence, is not that of being free from restrictions to know this or that, but that of being free not to know something. And to use age-old language, it had less to do with negative than positive liberty, less with freedom from than with freedom to. And as such, academic freedom should perhaps be thought of not so much, or at least not only, as a right, but as a duty that we as academics and researchers have. So having the duty to be ignorant, to not know something, to engage with the unknown, what could this mean? It does not mean, of course, that biased, selective ignorance should be protected under the guise of academic freedom. Rather, it means that insofar as knowledge always begins and ends in ignorance, and insofar as every new piece of knowledge comes with a new, sometimes even bigger piece of ignorance, academic freedom should make it possible for researchers to systematically and fundamentally explore what they do not know. And this means, among many other things, that they should be able and allowed to question what they do know, to ask seemingly unanswerable questions, and to give questionable answers. That is, to make good mistakes, which is actually very hard, and to fail, to try again and fail better, which is perhaps even harder. And I think of this as a duty that any researcher has. But in saying this, I also automatically think of the institutional conditions that need to be in place for the researcher to be able to act upon this duty, to be allowed to be someone who acts upon it. And our current academic world doesn't like mistakes. It doesn't like vulnerability or failure. It likes success. And there's nothing wrong with success, but there is something wrong with the notion of success that excludes even the possibility of failure. Just like there's something wrong with the view of knowledge that denies the ignorance by which it is always unavoidably accompanied. And all the same, there is something amiss when answers start to matter more than questions, and when only those questions are allowed to be asked which are already held to be answerable. And that's the beautiful paradox of knowledge. The more we know, the more we don't know, or that is, the better we know what we don't know. And it is this paradox that, paraphrasing Harari, stands at the heart of the human quest for knowledge. Only once we admit that we do not know the answers to our most important questions, can we start our attempt to obtain the knowledge needed to answer them. And this holds in the exact sciences as much as it does in the social sciences and the humanities. And on this level, they are, in fact, indistinguishable. And what makes NIAS unique for me is that it takes this seriously. That it takes seriously the fact that in order to push beyond the present limits of our knowledge, it is crucial to be given the time and resources to explore our own ignorance, to find out what we don't know, to find out why we don't know it, and how we might get to know it. So this, then, is what I hope to encounter and achieve during my time at NIAS, that after some 10 months of intellectual exchange, I not only know more, but also know less. For that would mean, for me personally, that I have really probed the limits of my own knowledge and that I have fulfilled my duty of being truly academically free. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Indeed, I found myself in difficult position now after this amazing information about the concept of academic freedom. But let me share my point of view, please. Once upon a time, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry said, I know, but one freedom, and that is the freedom of the mind. It's a great honor to stand here participating in the opening of this academic year of NIAS Institute, which was established to be a haven for scholars who aspire to work with absolute academic freedom. My name is Ghazwan Yaghi. Since 1999, I have worked as an archaeologist in academic institutions in Syria and Egypt, and in recent years at the Institute of Area Studies at Leiden University. This experience allowed me to observe the various forms of academic institutions and the controversy that has always existed around this concept throughout the world in general and between West and East, where the political control and the absence of democratic traditions in the educational and scientific research institutions lead to inadequate knowledge and lack of scientific production. Albert Einstein said, everything that is really great and inspiring is created by the individual who can labor in freedom. My friends, academic freedom for me is the principle that academic institutions are independent of any state, that allow teachers, students, and scholars to pursue knowledge without political, religious, or ideological interference. When checking the records of academic freedom, we can see that this concept has suffered several centuries of religious restrictions and unfortunately is still suffering from many types of political and democratic ages. Many facts show that each country has its own borders and explanations that are associated with this concept. On the other hand, many national courts still confirm that academic freedom isn't absolute and must be exercised within federal laws and social regulation. I believe that this concept is still facing a crisis that has intensified in recent years. Academic freedom has a global challenge, and most influential countries and unions lack a standard definition of this critical concept. The official lack of consensus between the European Union countries, although they have the richest experience in academic freedom, creates a vacuum exploited by parties and politicians worldwide, especially in countries already suffering from undemocratic regimes, who impose their definitions of their political agendas and orientation. What happened in Hungary, Professor Nadia already mentioned, especially in 2017, is an excellent example of the needs of the European consensus on these standard definitions. The honorable academic reputation of NIAS makes me believe that NIAS can play an essential role in developing a common European concept of academic freedom that corresponds to the needs of its current position and keeps pace with the future global scientific changes. Finally, if freedom is the oxygen of the soul, as all people agree, then I believe that academic freedom is the oxygen of the mind. Thank you very much for your attention.
On the 28th of April of this year, I stood in the sun on the docks of the idyllic island of Vlieland, waiting to be ferried back to the mainland. In anticipation of my return to work the next day, I checked Twitter for updates on exciting findings of new research and relevant political developments. However, my Twitter feed did not alert me to news about the Dutch coalition negotiations, nor to new insights about generational divides in political preferences. Instead, it informed me about a profile the Dutch far-right website Visor to the Left had published about me. Within hours, my email box was flooded with hate mail, my voicemail filled with threatening messages, and my social media accounts paralyzed by login attempts. When we discuss contemporary challenges to academic freedom, we usually focus on countries such as Turkey, Russia, Hungary, or Brazil. And indeed, in these authoritarian or semi-authoritarian regimes, the state threatens university autonomy in fundamental ways. However, even in liberal democracies like the Netherlands, there is reason for concern. In these countries, academic freedom might be enshrined into law. And these countries might score very high on the Academic Freedom Index, a scientific project to monitor academic freedom across the world. But the same index also reveals that one specific indicator of academic freedom is under pressure everywhere: the freedom of academic and cultural expression in relation to political issues. This development is probably the result of society becoming polarized politically. Recent research of my colleague Roderick Wekker shows that political polarization increasingly leads to something he calls factual belief polarization, a situation in which citizens are far more willing to accept facts and findings that are in line with their pre-existing political convictions, and far more likely to reject findings that contradict these convictions, leading to political strife over the facts and findings themselves. In this context, attacks on academics that engage in the public and political debate can become virulent and, if we're not careful, even violent. At the NIAS, I hope to deepen my understanding of this phenomenon in two ways. First, by studying if populist parties contribute to this development through their appeals to common sense and the promotion of intuitive over analytical thinking. I'm extremely happy that I can undertake this challenging endeavor in the context of a NIAS theme group fellowship, which brings together scholars from different disciplines and different Dutch universities. Second, I also hope that the NIAS will be an environment in which we, as a scholarly community, can explore how to translate research findings in such a way that we will be able to effectively communicate with citizens with different political orientations. I am particularly excited to develop plans with scholars from across the globe and with the artists and writers in residence at the NIAS. I firmly believe that their perspectives will lead to innovative approaches, and that they will also motivate me to stand strong and speak out about challenges to democracies that I perceive throughout my research. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rahul, Rao, Stella Nyanzi on screen, Lukas Verburgt, Ghazwan, Yaghi, and Sarah de Lange. Thank you so much for these impressive pitches that you gave. Well, we've turned 50, and when a daughter turns 50, she invites her mother on stage to have a short conversation about these 50 years of relationship. Well, the relationship between NIAS and the Mother Institute, the KNW, the Royal Academy of Arts and Science, has not started 50 years ago. And I would like to invite the new director of the Royal Academy, Wilma de Koning, who has just started her new job, to talk with me a little bit more about our relationship. Thank you, Wilma. Please come in. Yes, thank you. How have you started your new job as mother of NIAS?
Well, it's the first time that I'm called the mother of NIAS, so it's impressive. Well, let me start by congratulating you with your 50th anniversary, because it's a memorable moment. And I think what I've heard this afternoon is very impressive, and it's food for thought, so to say. And that's a nice bridge to my new job. I started the 1st of June. And formally, I started 1st of July in this function, or in this job. And well, I'm feeling a sort of Alice in Wonderland. I'm wandering through the organization, the diversity of institutes, of which NIAS is one of them, but also the quality of the people I meet, I work with, the quality of the research that's been done or is done in the institutes. Well, it's very impressive. And at the same time, I see things, I think, well, perhaps we can do that in another way, or perhaps we can do that even better. And that's my Alice of Wonderland look. And I hope that I keep my Alice in Wonderland glasses for a long time. I keep wandering in this organization. And as a final remark on this question, I would like to say that I really am very honored that I may do this job. It's a wonderful place to be. And well, every day I have great joy to go to Amsterdam and go to the Trippenhuis and where we are neighbors, because the NIAS is housing in a beautiful pond, beautiful place next to the building where the Royal Academy is housed. So thank you for the question.
Yeah. So, and I'm curious to know, and perhaps the audience with me, can you shed a little bit light on the history? Of course, you are new, but I suppose that you know a little bit more about why NIAS has become one of the institutes of the Royal Academy in the first place.
Yeah, well, it's a good question to ask, because on first sight, it seems that NIAS is a sort of strange institute compared to the others, because there's a clear research program, and research is done within certain disciplines and across disciplines. And NIAS has not that kind of research programs. But the ambition of the Royal Academy is inspiring people together. Bringing them together so that they can build relationships, so that they can do their research, acquire and share knowledge. And if you look at that mission and you look at NIAS, then it's a sort of logical combination. NIAS strengthened that ambition and has an important role in realizing that. And with the stories and the presentations I heard today, it only emphasizes that it's very important that there is a place in the Netherlands where you can, because I'm not a researcher, you are, research can be done in a free way. And academic freedom is a topic of this anniversary, and I think it's a very important topic at the moment, because there's a lot of things going on that threatens the academic freedom, the freedom of people. And everything we can do to stop that from happening, that threatening, is very welcome. And it's good to see that NIAS plays an important role in that.
Yes. Well, we are very happy. We started as an orphan NIAS. We were without a mother institute, and I believe in the 1980s, the end of the 1980s, 88, NIAS came under the wing of the Royal Academy. Yeah. And indeed, I believe that both institutes share this idea of free intellectual space, but also that we both aim to be a kind of the conscious, to play a role of the consciousness of what academic freedom, research, scholarly research, arts should be about, and how we can create, and how we also should make place or create a space that it can transform and that it can change over time, that we do not set it in stone. And I feel that the KNW and NIAS together are a very good match. And I want to thank you on behalf of NIAS for being such a wonderful mother institute. And let's move to the next 50 years. Okay. So congratulations with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on stage. Wilma de Koning. Yes, so now we wrap this wonderful program up by some birthday wishes that we received from some of our alumni, some of our sister institutes who are also part of the Royal Academy, and some of our partners. And let's take a look before we move to the foyer for drinks and bites. Thank you.
I remember very well visiting the NIAS for the first time in the early 1990s, with the demographer Dirk van der K in charge. NIAS, back then, in a leafy Wassenaar villa district, resembled a monastery, quiet and serene. Now, some 30 years later, the institute has been catapulted in a very different ecosystem. Amsterdam, a vibrant global node already since the 17th century. With all sorts of distractions, but also stimulating interaction with surrounding scholars of the University of Amsterdam and the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences. and moreover with Amsterdam's urban society. And as such, this new embedding mirrors the times that are changing. My cordial congratulations with the 50th anniversary.
Collega's van het NIAS, hartelijk gefeliciteerd. Namens het Woordencentrum. Hoera!
Hoera! Hoera!
Erasmus University and the Netherlands Institute for Advanced Study together finance and host the Van Doorn Fellowship and Chair. On behalf of the board of the Van Doorn Fellowship and Chair, I wish to congratulate the NIAS with its 50th anniversary.
Dear NIAS friends and colleagues, I'm extremely happy and proud to celebrate here today NIAS 50th anniversary. NIAS moved from Wassenaar to Amsterdam. It evolved from monastery to beehive. Its community becoming more and more diverse, but for fellows, it stayed the heavenly place it always was. A place to reflect and to interact, to generate new ideas at the crossroad of cultures and disciplines. I sincerely hope NIAS will be such a place for many, many more years to come. Happy anniversary, NIAS.
To the actual and future staff of NIAS, I wish that NIAS remains what it is, a place where the acquisition of new knowledge is facilitated, a place where the thinking and asking of complex questions take preference over speed and definitive answers, a place where the humanities and the sciences go hand in understanding the world around us. May I wish NIAS another healthy 50 years.
On behalf of the whole team at the Dutch Fund for In-Depth Journalism, I'd like to wish you a very happy birthday.
In my observation, fellows at NIAS can be characterized by their open-mindedness. They see the variety of their backgrounds as an enrichment. Such a state of mind matters especially for the thematic groups, most of which delivered lasting results. Their collaboration produced higher insights than would have been achieved by the same people working individually.
Academic freedom is crucially important for safeguarding democracy. It implies that the academic community of scholars is in the position to engage with the troubles of our time in an independent way. They are free to choose how to engage. For 50 years, NIAS is a place that nurtures these scholars by giving them a space and a community to explore new ideas that are shaping the world to come. Thank you, NIAS, and congrats with the 50th anniversary.
Gefeliciteerd NIAS met 50 jaar creativiteit, tijd voor wetenschappers in de stad, in het land. Als Amsterdam, als gemeente zijn we heel blij dat we daar nu deel van zijn met de Urban Fellows, die veel verschil maken in de stad. Ga zo door. Gefeliciteerd. Een hele mooie prestatie. Dankjewel.
As chair of the NIAS Fellow Association, I hereby want to congratulate the NIAS with its 50th anniversary. The importance of a scholar's paradise for curiosity-driven research has not become outdated. On the contrary. In small children, the bidirectional relation of natural curiosity and scientific reasoning and experimentation is very easy to see. Knowledge is acquired just for the fun of it. And we hope that the NIAS will remain forever young. As an academic playgarden which scientists and artists alike are free to follow their natural curiosity. Congratulations.
Since 25 years, the Willem Duyvendak and prior the Jelle Zijlstra Fellowships are hosted by NIAS. As chairman of both foundations, I want to emphasize how privileged and proud we are to be associated with your amazing institute. Congratulations.
Dear all, this was our opening of the academic year in which we celebrated 50 years of academic freedom, in which we celebrated the coming of our new fellows, and We would like to thank all the speakers. Thank you, Robbert, Nadia, and the new fellows, Hagar, for your spoken word. And we would like to especially thank our partners, without whom we simply would not exist. And we really hope to partner up with you much longer, and thank you so much. This was our program. We very much would like to invite you to celebrate further with us in the foyer. I would like to ask you to leave the room through this door, starting with the people in the back, so that it is orderly and hygienic in these times. Thank you all so much. Thank you.